So this video will cover the marriage-based green card interview process. So first and most important, you have to appear together with your U.S. citizen permanent resident spouse to the interview. If this is impossible, if your spouse is on military duty or some exceptional circumstances, the officer may allow your spouse to appear via video, but for 9 or whatever, very high percentage of cases, both U.S. citizens or permanent resident spouse and the foreign national applicant have to appear together at the interview. So the first thing is show up on time, right? Appear on time. I tell everyone, show up about half an hour before the interview. If you're watching this during COVID, USCIS does not let individual applicants into the waiting room more than 15 minutes before the time on the interview notice. So I tell everyone 30 minutes should be enough to get through security and be there about 15 minutes before the interview time. If one of our attorneys, me or someone else from our firm, is going to be going to your interview, we will meet with you about an hour, 45 minutes before, just to make sure we go through any last minute questions you may have. So again, show up on time. It's really important. You don't want your interview to be rescheduled because you were late. The second part is once you show up, you're going to present your interview notice, so have it ready, as well as ID, so your driver's license, state ID, passport, any sort of identification document, to the security guard that's going to greet you at the door. And the first step is going to be they're going to look at the interview notice, make sure that you're the individual that's supposed to appear, and then you're going to go through security. So think of security like airport security, right? There's going to be a metal detector, and you're going to take your shoes off, your belt off, your watches off. So I tell everyone, dress appropriately, right? Like, don't wear 6 belts because it's going to be annoying to get through security. Once you pass security, the next step is going to be checking in. And this is really important, right? So you're going to go, if it's a smaller office, like the Charleston office we go to regularly, it's, the waiting room's right there. You can't miss it. And some of the bigger USCIS offices there in, bigger cities such as New York, you have to make sure you go to the right floor that's listed on the interview notice, and, check in when you show up at that waiting area on the right floor. Don't just sit down, because no one's going to know that you've actually arrived, and nobody's going to call you. So you'll always see there's these usually like little, little desks, right? Or it depends how the office looks. But the bottom line is you will see there's a check-in counter, and go up to those officers there, present your interview notice. They'll ask you to take your fingerprints, index, and thumb to make sure that you're actually the individual that's supposed to be there. If you're watching this during COVID, they will also ask you some questions about whether you've been in contact with anyone that's been exposed to COVID. If you answer yes, they're going to reschedule your interview immediately. So just know that. Hopefully you're watching this and COVID's no longer a thing. But basically, once you check in at the counter, the officer there will either give you a little ticket, or the officer will just tell you you'll be called by name. But at this point, you know that USCIS knows you have arrived, and now you just have to wait for the officer to call you. I tell everyone this waiting period is actually the single worst part of the entire interview process. And the reason for that is that it could be 10 minutes, it could be half an hour, it could be an hour, and you have no control over it because it has to do with the officer's schedule. So basically, the officer, each hour, the officer has a different interview. If the interview before you or 2 interviews before you just ran over because it was a complicated case, well, then yours is going to be pushed back, and you have no control over that. The reason I bring this up is, first of all, don't be alarmed if you see people coming in after you, right, that are getting called for the interview, or they're checking in after you, but they're called for the interview before you. It's not the end of the world. It's just a different officer who may be, who doesn't have any cases that got delayed. So that's not something that you should be alarmed about. The second reason I bring this up is prepare to wait a long time, and make sure you eat before you drink coffee. If that's something you do, just make sure you know that this may take longer than the time you're allocating based on the time the interview is supposed to start based on the notice. Also, if these interviews are during work days, if you have to take off from work, don't just take off an hour. Give yourself a little bit more time and communicate that, right, so that you're not overly worried while you're waiting there, because the process is anxiety inducing enough without having to worry about other things. Once the officer walks out of the back room and calls your name or ticket number, what will happen is the officer will escort you to a back room, which is the officer's office, where the interview will be conducted. You will walk in. The way it will look is there'll be 2 chairs next to each other where you and your spouse will be sitting. If an attorney is going with you, there's usually a chair next to you or behind you. It kind of depends how the office is configured by the officer, but the attorney will sit somewhere near you and be in the room with you. When you first show up, the officer will make you stand and will swear you in. So the officer will make you raise your right hand and then make you swear that you're going to tell nothing but the truth. And after that, you will sit down and the interview will start. The officer will start asking you questions. And picture it like an office setting, right? The officer's behind the desk, you're on the other side of the desk, and you're asked questions back and forth. I shot separate videos about the questions you will be asked and the documents you should bring to your marriage-based green card interview. So those you can find in the description. But as to the process, this is really it. At the end of the interview, I tell everyone, ask the officer. Ask the officer how it went. If the officer doesn't tell you, the officer can say that, the case is recommended for approval. Obviously, that's good news. The officer may issue you a request for evidence, which means that the officer was not satisfied with the documentation and the interview, but is giving you a chance to supplement the record with further evidence. Or the officer may say, something needs to be reviewed in your case. In that case, the officer will not make a decision right there, but they will hold the file and you will find out via a notice that's mailed to you. Or the officer could deny the case. Frankly, in my experience, it's very rare for the officer to just deny a case right off, right at the end of the first interview. So that's really rare, but those are the outcomes. But I tell everyone, make sure you ask because you want to know it. So this is really, really important to you. And yes, that covers the marriage-based green card interview process. Hope it was helpful.